It was summer, so I was out of school at the time. My mother was working full-time, and we were living in a trailer that belonged to my aunt and uncle, who was an immediate neighbor. Though their house was somewhat behind our trailer, rather than directly beside us. Instead, right beside us was a small set of 2 apartments that my aunt and uncle also owned and leased out. It was practically in my front yard, with the way things had been set up, and the road was a down-sloping horseshoe, and we lived smack in the bottom of the U. It was a bit isolated, being out in the country, but it was a pretty safe neighborhood all in all, and my uncle was a police officer. People think things like that offer extra security, but I think it's just a lie people tell themselves to sleep better at night. Anyways, like I said, it was June, and I was enjoying my summer so far. I spent most of my days sleeping in and being lazy around the house. My mother worked 8-hour day shifts, so until about 5 p.m. it was just me and my dog in the house. On this particular morning, I noticed there was a guy outside who was painting the windowsills of the apartment building my aunt owned. My uncle, aunt, and cousins, across from them, were all out of town on vacation at the time. I didn't think anything of this, really. I saw him moving around and taping and painting most of the morning. Sometime after lunch, I let my dog out to go to the bathroom. I was at the back door, waiting for her to finish, when Painter Guy walked around the side of my trailer, stopping when he saw me. He immediately gave a weird vibe. He was in his 40s and balding, but the hair he had left was all over the place. His eyes looked blurry, confused, and not totally in focus. I figured maybe he was just drunk. I live in the South, and plenty of men drink while they work. But I also became immediately worried because I also live in an area notorious for pillheads and drug addicts. He looked super disheveled, and he was wearing boxers and a t-shirt. I couldn't remember what he had been wearing when I first noticed him, but this definitely rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't think of any accident or mishap that a painter would encounter that would dictate taking off your pants. Upon noticing the guy standing there, all bleary-eyed and minimally swaying, I called my dog and ended up having to go further into the yard to retrieve her, because she stayed in place watching Painter Guy growling. As I worked to drag her into the house, Painter Guy stumbled up to my porch and said, "Hey, where's your outdoor toilet?" And that was enough for me. I bolted it back into the house, locked my back door, and checked all the other doors and windows to make sure everything was locked. I was honestly going to brush it off as a drunk person and let it alone. But I called my mom at work to ask her who it was and if she knew someone was painting her sister's apartments today. While I was on the phone with her, I saw that he was on my porch, rummaging around. After that, he went around to the end of our trailer by the driveway, and I followed inside, looking through the windows to keep track of him. He sat down in our swing and put an old gross rag that was sitting on it on his head. He appeared to go to sleep. My mother suggested I call the cops, and told me she was on her way home. She had about a 15-minute drive. I hung up with my mom and called the cops. And it was about the perfect time too. They were on their way, and would have someone there shortly, they said. As soon as I got off the phone with them and gave my mom a call on her cell to see where she was, the man on the swing got up. I had hoped he was passed out drunk, and it would be an easy wait for the police. That was not to be the case, though. The man stumbled away from the porch swing and made his way up to my front porch. At this point, I was scared out of my wits, and I began closing all the mini blinds, double-checking the doors and making sure the windows were secure. He started screaming and ranting and raving at me. I couldn't understand a word he was saying. And then I heard the doorknob rattle. It sounded like he was going to jerk the doorknob out of the door. And when he finally must have realized it was locked, he started beating on the door insanely, all the while still screaming. He was knocking on the windows, slapping them and beating them. I was sure he was going to break through, and I had no idea what to do. The only thing I could think of was to grab a kitchen knife. My mother heard a commotion and directed me to call the police back and tell them to hurry. I got them back online, and the operator could hear the madness going on outside. She said the police were on the way, on my road even, but they couldn't find my house. I saw them go by outside and did my best to direct her so she could direct them. I'm still not sure how it was so difficult to get to the bottom of a horseshoe road. My mother actually arrived before the police, tearing into the driveway like a bat out of hell. They noticed this and followed, but she was still quicker. By the time she made it to the front porch, Painter Guy had stopped beating on everything out there, and he started swinging on the front screen door, like a 5-year-old would. He had his hands on the top, his feet lifted off the ground, and was swinging on it, humming like the creepy fucker he was. My mother approached him and asked him just what the hell he was doing on her porch. His response, "My wife is in there," totally chilled me and completely freaked me out. The police came up finally, got him off our door, detained him, and started questioning him. From what I pieced together, he thought that I was his wife, and alternately, that I was holding his wife hostage, and was totally dedicated to getting inside the house. After the ransom checks on him, they found out he had no wife. He had never been married, and was messed up out of his gourd on a mixture of pain pills, alcohol, and who knows what else. They arrested him on a few different charges, and my mom stayed at home with me the rest of the day, and took the next off as well. Our screen door was bent like crazy. It turned out my aunt had hired him and then gone out of town, so she had no idea what was going on at all. And his work was so sloppy, she had to hire someone back just to come fix it. So, creepy painter guy, let's not meet. Two. To start this story off, here's a little background. I moved to America from Eastern Europe, and this event happened around my 4th or 5th year in America, so my English was still not that great. I was a 13-year-old girl, and I've had other creepy events happen to me. But years later, this one stood out the most, since it was a very close call. It was the weekend, and my family and I were preparing for a barbecue we were hosting. My mom borrowed a mixer from our neighbors and asked me to return it, and being my mom's little helper, I agreed. Our neighbors lived across the street, but a few houses down. After I gave them their mixer, I walked back home, still staying on my neighbor's side. I walked down 2 or 3 houses until I crossed the street in a horizontal way. Before I got to the other sidewalk, I didn't think much of it then, but I passed in front of a dusty brown-colored van. It was parked next to the sidewalk, but its engine was running, and the back seat windows are tilted. Didn't even know it was there. I passed the van and turned right towards my house, which I had to walk past another 2 houses to get to mine. Suddenly, the driver of the van yelled out to me, asking for directions to a street. There was nothing much off-looking about him. He looked in his earlier mid-20s, dark hair, dark skin, skinny, and had a Middle Eastern accent. The van looked old and was very dusty, as if no one cleaned it for months. Also, he was parked towards the opposite direction I was going, so we had the front passenger seat as a good distance between us. Anyways, I was trying my best not to sound like I have broken English. Told him to turn right, and then left and go straight. I was about to leave when he again asked me how to get there, as if he didn't hear me. Me being a nice little girl, trying to help a stranger out, I told him again how to get there. I was about to leave when he called out for the 3rd time on how to get there. At this point I thought, come on, man. And also my tongue started to hurt from not speaking English that well. But I thought maybe he had some kind of hearing problem or something. Also, I wasn't so close to the window, so maybe it was me. However, I had to get home to make it in time before the guests arrived at the barbecue, so I thought this was the final time I'd tell him how to get there. And then I'm off. I told him, go right, and ask someone else for directions, since I didn't have the strength to repeat myself for the 3rd time. I was just about to leave when he called out to me again, bruh. But this time his voice was a little bit quieter than before. And what he told me next set my blood boiling. I couldn't really hear what he was trying to say, so I had to come a little closer to the window. He said something like, you want to come see something? You want to? At the same time, he was quickly showing me something from his side. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a brown leather handbag or a wooden box. I couldn't tell because he was quickly hiding it away and showing it to me, only peeking it out as if to get me interested. I was standing there at least a minute in front of the window, trying to understand what he wants. Then, I froze solid. I understood exactly what he wanted. He must have mistaken me for a stupid girl so I would get into his car and see what's in his mystery bag, box, or whatever he was showing me. I kind of felt angry, but at the same time my heart was pumping in my ears. I knew he wanted me to go inside his car and take me away wherever the hell. Also, his eyes gave it away since he looked a bit nervous and shaken up. I slowly started to back away from the car and shake my head left and right like, no. Just when I was about to run like hell, the back door of the van slid open, when a middle-aged man, also dark hair and dark skin, but he was much more buffer than the driver. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me into the van, saying something like, that's easy, or I can make you. Whatever, I don't remember. What I do remember was his dark eyes. His eyes looked like they were so confident than the other guy, as if they were saying, I should not have tried to run away. I knew I should have screamed for help or just screamed. But I was so shocked and scared that it felt like I lost my ability to speak. There were all these horrible thoughts that started going through my head like, what were these men going to do to me? Is this the last time I will ever see my family? Or how will my family react when they learn I am missing? I almost gave in and was about to cry, but the man was just smiling and dragging me in like a dog on a leash. Then I don't know what happened, since it's all somewhat of a blur, but somehow thinking about my family made me get the strength of freaking Hercules. I managed to pull back my small wrist so hard that I slipped through the opening of his grip. Sorry for my bad explaining again. I don't speak English good. Apparently, his nails were quite long and sharp that when I freed myself, his nails cut my skin deep, that I could even see my blood through the thin layers of skin. I turned around and ran as fast as I possibly could. When I got home, I was crying like crazy. My mom calmed me down with a sweet treat as I told her everything while sobbing so hard. 3. This happened to me just last year. At the time, I lived above a Mexican restaurant with my sister and another roommate in a college town known for its parties. One night we had a friend of ours over late. Her apartment was only a block from the bus stop, and she was taking a cheap 3:30 a.m. bus to visit her parents. She didn't want to walk from her place so late at night, so my sleep schedule is awful anyway, so I agreed to keep her company and make sure she didn't fall asleep. When 3 rolls around, she leaves to wait for her bus. She was gone maybe 5 minutes when I hear very loud, frantic pounding on the door. I assumed she had forgotten something. I didn't want her to miss her bus, but we're also a very paranoid household, and it struck us as odd that she hadn't texted or called. Something in me hesitated. I grabbed my pepper spray and followed my sister to the door. Our front door has no peephole, and the building's security was terrible anyway. When my sister opened the door, there was a man standing there, almost a head taller than me and reeking of BO and cigarettes. The look on his face was extremely upsetting. He looked like he wasn't 100% there. His eyes, distant, glazed, red-ringed. Our eyes met, and I figured immediately that he was on something and was probably not a student. But I didn't even get the chance to react before my sister's reflexes kicked in. She slammed the door in his face and threw the deadbolt before he could even really register what had happened. Immediately, he started wailing on the door again. I was a little freaked out, but knew he couldn't get inside. And the noise woke my third roommate up, who came downstairs from the loft with her bat. Because one of her apartment rules was 1 weapon in every room. My sister grabbed the hammer in the bathroom closet. Like I said, we're all paranoid as fuck and love true crime stuff. He continued slamming on the door, but so far hadn't said a word. Just as we were considering calling the police, the noise stopped. We thought he'd left. But about 5 minutes later, the pounding started again. My sister shouted to fuck off and that she was calling the cops, and this time he left for good. I'm not sure if he meant any harm or if he was just confused and thought my apartment was his. All the doors, floors were identical. We also didn't know if he even lived in the building, although we later learned he lived across the hall. Either way, about 2 weeks later, my roommates and I were all woken up by a loud screaming in the hallway. A couple girls shouting to stop fighting. At least, 2 men obviously beating the shit out of each other. And party noises being muffled and unmuffled as a neighbor was opening, closing their door. Probably to watch the commotion. We called the cops, and they showed up right away. They'd probably already been called. We heard more shouting and presumably people being arrested. We were curious, so we went to watch off the balcony. And who do I see but our 3 a.m. guest, streaming blood from a broken nose as they put him into a car. I'm not sure if they got the other guy. I didn't see him, but also obviously they wouldn't put him in the same car. The next day, on my way to work, I actually got a look at our hallway. It was like a war zone. Spatters of blood all over the wall outside my apartment, bloody handprints on their door and mine, and even down the staircase and on the walls of the floor below, like they'd been fighting all through the halls. He ended up getting evicted for destroying property during their party, including apparently shattering the side glass door that led to their balcony, and missing rent payments. Yes, I was curious, and snooped because the eviction notice was just taped to their door for all to see. And I never saw him again. We moved out later that year, and the blood still hadn't been cleaned from the walls, despite our polite suggestions that they at least paint over it if they didn't want to clean it. Surprisingly, the company hadn't been able to lease our place after us. I can't imagine why.